Okay, we're going to get started in just 1 minute. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network Coffee Talks series, Learning and Connecting for Action. My name is Jonas Sipos, and I'm the Program Director for the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, which is coordinated by Local Concepts, a consulting firm providing the development and backbone support for the CFN. I'm joined today by another of the Local Concepts team members, Hannah Gross, who is the Outreach Coordinator for the network. Before we jump into the coffee talk, I will provide a very brief overview of the CFN. The Chesapeake Foodshed Network is a group of organizations, businesses, funders, agencies, and other change agents working across the Chesapeake watershed to build a stronger and more resilient food system. We are a relatively new initiative, not quite 2 years in the making, and the leadership group that spurred the network's development did so because they recognized that a great deal of extraordinary work was being done to advance our regional food system, but there was no entity intentionally trying to build connections, trust, and relationships among those out there doing the work. The mission of the CFN, therefore, is to catalyze connections and collaborations that help build a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We believe that by catalyzing connections and collaborations, we are stronger together such that we can help to accelerate change in our food system. We encourage conversation and connection in various ways, including via social media. Please note the username and hashtags on the slide footers. We would love to see your tweets. Here is a picture of our network building blocks. The foundation of our network is all about building connections, getting to know one another, sharing information and knowledge, building relationships and trust, with the thought that as we know one another better, we might, over time, see opportunities to align and to work collectively toward action. We invite anyone who supports our vision of a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system to participate in the Chesapeake Foodshed Network. The CSN Coffee Talks are a platform that the network has developed to help to catalyze connections around specific food system topics. We partner with resource experts who provide a quick learning opportunity through their webinar presentation. And then during the webinar and in the follow-up materials, we identify ways for people to continue to engage and dig in deeper around that particular topic. Today's Coffee Talk, Navigating a Treacherous Landscape, a Practitioner's Guide to GAP Food Safety Certification and the Food Safety Modernization Act, is an example of our partnership with a resource expert, Lindsey Gilmore, and I will be delighted to tell you more about her in just a moment. First, I'll share that at last count, 103 people across the U.S. had registered for this coffee talk. So clearly, this is a topic of great interest and concern today, and we are just delighted to be partnering with Lindsay. Just before I share Lindsay's bio and then turn it over to her, I will note some housekeeping items. If you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please type them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will be collecting your questions and we will share them with Lindsay following her presentation. And then within a few days of the webinar, we will share a recording of the presentation, any additional Q&A, and a post-webinar survey, which we would be very grateful if you would fill in with your feedback and your insights. And now on to Lindsay and the presentation. The presenter today will be Lindsey Gilmore, who's the owner of Organic Planet LLC, playing the roles of personal chef and food systems consultant. Lindsey Gilmore is also with Fair Food Philly. She has over 35 years of experience in the food industry as a chef and adult educator and 13 years in value chain coordination, working with farmers to develop efficiencies and systems to meet the demands of the wholesale marketplace. Her current focus is assisting farmers with food safety compliance. Ms. Gilmore has trained in Produce GAP's Harmonized Food Safety Standards, is qualified as a USDA internal auditor for the Harmonized Standards, is a qualified trainer for the FDA Produce Safety Rule, a qualified individual under the FDA Preventative Controls for Human Food Regulation, and has trained as an internal auditor for ISO 9001-22006 Quality Management Systems for Agricultural Enterprises. We are so delighted that she is sharing her expertise, and I apologize if my laughter came through. It's just the qualified individual piece in quotations is just a term that brings a smile to my face. Ms. Gilmore has a particular interest and experience in helping farmers work together to achieve food safety certification. From 2013 to 2015, she managed a group GAP pilot in Pennsylvania for Fair Food Philadelphia, successfully shepherding more than 120 Amish and Mennonite farmers through USDA group GAP certification. She's currently managing a project in Mississippi for the Wallace Center at Winrock International, creating a USDA-approved single entity management food safety model as a viable solution for under-resourced small farm cooperatives. Amazing. She continues to work with farmers and orchardists individually and in groups, helping them overcome their trepidation and develop food safety programs that make sense for them. Lindsay, as I said, we are just so delighted that you are here. And I just wanted to double check if I'll be sharing your screen. Does that work?
You can, yeah. Well, I'll do my best to navigate two different screens at the same time.
Okay. Bear with us as we just transition over to Lindsay. And recall, please, that we will be collecting your questions, so just put them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll share them with Lindsay after her presentation.
Okay. So can I get rid of this little, oh, I can move that over there. Okay. Well, I've never had my bio read to me, so that was an experience. The Ms. Gilmore
Lindsay,
part.
I'm not yet seeing your screen, just so you know.
Oh, that's weird. I have it up, so I'm not sure. Hang on, let me try escaping. Can you see that?
I do not. Anna, do you?
Oh, show my screen? Is that what I need to do?
Yes. Yes.
Aha.
There we go. Perfect.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Go to this view. No, not that view. Sorry, everybody. We were trying to figure out these things before you all came on, but I'm going to go.
I will assure you that it is well worth the wait. There is incredible amounts of information in here, and I know that it will be just a moment.
There we go. That looks much better. Okay. So thank you, Jonna, for that amazing introduction. Please, everybody, just think of me as Lindsay, the Ms. Gilmore. I don't think I've ever been called that. I think I probably wrote that for some university or other. So thank you for the intro. Thank you to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network for hosting this webinar, and thank you to all of you. I don't know how many of you there are, but thank you for joining us. Food safety is not a sexy topic, as you all would agree, but it certainly gets a lot of airtime right now, despite that. And because of that, it leads to a lot of misinformation and confusion. And like most human challenges, it's just not as straightforward as we would wish. So here is what we wish it looked like, this lovely formal French garden. Unfortunately, it looks a lot more like this. And the Food Safety Modernization Act is a very complex and confusing place. You seldom find any solid ground there, yet things are still changing, and it takes time to become familiar with the twists and turns. And then you combine the two of them, and it's a pretty scary place. I found these images just to amuse myself, really. So this is the goal for today. I don't have a lot of time, and I've squished an hour-and-a-half presentation into 35 to 40 minutes. So we don't have time to dig deep today, but I'll do my best to explain the most important pieces of the puzzles to help you. And to help me, this is a new thing for me. I have a lot of conversations with people about food safety, and there's a lot of confusion, so I decided to, oops, sorry, I'm going ahead of myself here. I decided to come up with this presentation, but in in refining this tool, if you would think about, and helping me to refine this tool, if you would think about what is still confusing or what you still think is inaccurate and what you would like to explore further and share that with us, that would be really helpful. Okay, so let's go. Why produce food safety and why now? So statistics show that the number of illnesses caused each year by fruits and vegetables is greater than for any other food type. So sometimes you see the statistic 46% of foodborne illness issues, I should say, are traced back to fruits and vegetables. And this surprised a lot of people when you think about it. Most of us believe that fruits and vegetables are the most nourishing things you can possibly consume. But it's not the fruits and vegetables themselves that cause the illness, it's contamination. And that is mostly from human or animal feces and mostly through human error or ignorance. So we like to talk about food safety is all about following the poop. And poop is an equal opportunity offender. It doesn't care if your farm is organic or biodynamic or hydroponic or aeroponic. It's all about how we handle the food. So of course none of us wants to feed someone contaminated food. Thinking about fresh fruits and vegetables causing illness and death is a situation guaranteed to make everybody freak out. So for big food buyers, that means requiring that their produce suppliers show proof they are taking steps to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. So this, in response to this fear, there is now a worldwide proliferation of scientists, universities, government agencies, industry partnerships, NGOs, for-profit companies, and they're all devising food safety standards, risk management tools, audit schemes, certification systems, training programs, data management platforms, and the list goes on. Some of these are focused more on meeting the needs of farmers. Some of them are focused on the needs of the food industry. And what it all means is a very crowded terrain. And then along comes FSMA. So until FSMA, produce food safety was considered voluntary. It was a business decision, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But consumer and industry concern has led to the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, and this gives the FDA unprecedented powers with a very small budget to regulate the food industry. So for many produce growers, packers, and distributors, this means food safety is no longer a business choice, it is the law. So this is what we're going to go through today. And we're going to start right here with GAP basics. We'll start with Produce Food Safety 101. So I want to look at the terminology, the concepts, and the acronyms. You're likely to hear a lot, or you have been hearing a lot. And hopefully this will save you some confusion along the way. So in the produce world, GAP or GAPS, Good Agricultural Practices, has become a catch-all acronym for practices and procedures that reduce food safety risk. And notice that I say reduce risk. It's really not wise to claim that you can make any human enterprise risk-free. We live in the real world, and it's a very litigious one. So you want to just say you're reducing risk. You're doing everything that you can to make food safer. However, it's not as simple as one acronym. There is a forest of acronyms out there, and here's a small sampling. We'll be getting this to you as a PDF if you want to use this as a guide. So you'll be able to look at this again later. When you develop a food safety program for your operation, it really helps to have a set of standard requirements to work from. So a food safety standard is defined as a set of specific requirements, rules, and procedures that are believed to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. And there are many food safety standards out there. They may be developed and owned by government agencies or for-profit companies or non-profit companies. For instance, there's Maryland GAP, there's Massachusetts GAP, Global GAP, USDA GAP, Primus GFS, Canada GAP, there's even New Zealand GAP, which I have to give a push for that. And they all share the same basic building blocks of a food safety program. They just differ in the details and the stringency and the cost. In other parts of the world, food safety standards include sustainable growing methods and worker safety. But here in the US, no surprise really, the produce food safety is most exclusively concerned with pathogens, with microorganisms and contamination. But complying with food safety standards and using sustainable farming methods are not mutually exclusive. And I encourage you, I'm pretty sure most of the people on this call will be interested in this. This is the one thing that makes food safety pretty exciting, or can. There's an organization called Wild Farm Alliance that has really great publications describing how conservation practices can help protect water and air quality, support pollinators and wildlife, while reducing the risk of contamination. So I really encourage you to take a look at that if you're not familiar with it. So a food safety scheme is a program audited to specific standards. And there are a bunch of different organizations out there with food safety schemes. There's 3 of them here, and then there's the USDA, which has its own food safety schemes. Scheme is kind of a derogatory term here in the US, but elsewhere in the world it isn't. And since a lot of the food safety stuff that we're familiar with has originated in Europe and in Britain, scheme is a word that's typically used. So here is an example of the USDA audit program or audit scheme for harmonized field operations and harvesting standards. This is the one that I'm trained in, that I'm most familiar with, so it'll come up a lot in this conversation, but there are many others out there. The next thing that you may hear about is an audit checklist. This is based on the standard. It's developed by the food safety scheme or for the food safety scheme. And here is the USDA checklist that goes along with the previous standard. If you want to be food safety certified, you need to put together a food safety manual, and that's if food safety certified for your farm, for your packing house, for your processing facility, whatever it is. But this one is for a farm. And again, this it describes the food safety program for your operation, and it's usually designed to comply with whatever standard you are required or you have chosen to follow. And the other thing in your food safety manual, so you create a food safety manual that includes the food safety plan and, equally important, the records and documentation that show you're following the plan. So these are logs, logs, water test results, chemical records, etc. And this can be the hardest concept for people to accept and implement, because it adds, developing and creating all of this stuff, it adds a lot to your workload. But it's the one key way you can prove to an auditor that your plan is being implemented. So they like to say, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. So this is something you really need to start factoring into a food safety program. You may sometimes hear the term certification body, or CB. That's the independent agency that verifies that your operation complies with the food safety standard against which you are being audited. So whichever standard you're using, the CB will come along and audit it to that standard. And these auditors are themselves audited and accredited. There's a couple of organizations that I'm familiar with that do that, the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, and ISO, the International Standard Organization. So the auditors are audited. Some entities, such as the USDA, audit their own food safety schemes. This can be a little bit of a controversial issue. Some people believe there's a conflict of interest there, but it does make the audit a lot cheaper, generally speaking. And then there are audit schemes that approve other certifying bodies to perform the audits to their standards. And typically these audits can be more expensive. I won't say definitively, but typically. Another thing you may sometimes hear about is GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative. And I sometimes hear people say that a farm is GFSI certified. This is inaccurate. GFSI is considered the gold standard for food safety scheme benchmarking. So that means they are providing assurance that a scheme meets a certain criteria. But it's not a food safety scheme or a certifying body. It's an industry partnership that provides this assurance, and it's a European-based partnership. So The final thing in this GAP basics is supply chain data management platforms. So there are some big buyers there, Cisco in particular, and there are others that are requiring suppliers to upload information, food safety documentation, to a supply chain management program. And this is usually an additional cost for the supplier. A great example of vertical integration in an industry is this Azul Supply Chain Management, which owns Primus GFS, which is an audit scheme, and Primus Labs, which is a certifying body, and has contracts with big companies like Cisco. And they promise efficient information management, and they charge accordingly. So if you may come across a buyer that requires you to upload your information to Azul, and that's usually meaning you have to do a Primus GFS audit. Food Logic is another one that I have worked with a little bit. They are more of an open source kind of organization. They don't consider that they own the information that you upload to their platform, whereas Azul does. So I'm not going to get into details about Food Logic, but it is an interesting organization. All right, so let's get into try and sort out what's voluntary, what's market-driven, and what is the law. I'm going too far ahead here myself. Sorry. So voluntarily, you could adopt GAP in your operation. It makes good sense. It's a best practice. Even if you aren't required to do so by a customer or the FDA, it can be a good marketing tool as well. Even if you're just selling to a farmer's market, it can be a helpful thing because people are concerned about this. The market-driven side of this is when your customer requires you to have a third-party audit or to be certified food safe. And usually you don't decide to do this and go to the trouble and expense of a third-party audit unless it's required by your customers. But it's still considered voluntary. It's a business decision. You may lose a customer or customers, but it's not required by law. Sorry. So the law, on the other hand, is FSMA. And I don't have time to get into FSMA details today, but here are some key points. There are 3 regulations that may affect farmers and food hubs and processors, smaller processors. These are the Produce Safety Rule, the Preventative Controls for Human Food Rule, and the Sanitary Food Transport Act, which has just been brought in, but it won't be implemented until 2017. But the Produce Safety Rule, or PSR, and the Preventative Controls for Human Food Rule, were implemented in January. So the Produce Safety Rule requires you to attend a training, and this has to be FDA approved. The Produce Safety Alliance so far has the only approved training, but there are others working on that. The Produce Safety Rule requires systems and records that are very similar to GAP. People don't like to call them GAP, but they're basically science-based minimum standards. So it's the stuff that you're familiar with if you've done training. It doesn't require a food safety plan, but you may as well have a plan. Once you get everything done, it pretty much is a plan. And then there will be inspections, and I'll get into that in the next slide. The Preventative Controls does require a food safety plan. It requires that's where the qualified individual comes in. So somebody in a management role who will be managing the food safety program at your facility will have to take this training. And again, there's an FDA approved training out there, and we have in our links and resources, I have some links to find out where those are going on. It requires you, if you're covered by this rule, if you have to comply, you have to register with the FDA as a facility. This has been going on since 2003. That's not a new thing. But again, in the links and resources, we have information on how to register. And then again, there will be FDA approved inspections. And as I said, the Sanitary Food Transport Act, it's implemented next year. It's for someone who's already got standard operating procedures for their operation, you probably already have what you need for this. But yeah, if you haven't, if you have to comply, then you will need to get some standard operating procedures in place and train your people. All right. So FDA Authorized Inspections. These are, there's a lot of conversations out there now about enforcement of the FSMA regs. Farm and facility inspections by FDA approved entities, and will be happening. The frequency will be at the discretion of the FDA, meaning they haven't decided yet. It's proposed there will be consultative and regulatory inspections. So the consultative inspections will be kind of like mock audits or mock inspections. The results will be for the farmer's internal purposes or the facility's internal purposes. And the regulatory will actually be the inspections that determine your eligibility for certification. And consultative can be requested as a precursor to the regulatory. The fee structure is still to be decided. There's some suggestion that farmers will only have to pay if there is a problem. So the FDA does plan to inspect all farms and facilities covered by the rules. For now, FSMA inspections and GAP audits are separate processes, which could lead to some problems down the road, but hopefully it means that many audit schemes are being revised to be FSMA compliant so that you can have one third-party audit and it will also be a FSMA authorized inspection. The main differences in the two are language and interpretation, and for now, water testing. So just to recap, the law. Your food enterprise is covered by one or more FSMA rules. You must meet the requirements. But even if you're exempt, if your customer demands it, you must, and you want to do business with that person, you need to have a third-party audit. And some buyers may require, and there are probably more of them, will require you to be FSMA compliant. So the hope is that by 2017, any third-party GAP certification will be FSMA compliant. Okay. This is something, hopefully you're laughing at this. I really like this image. Okay, so timeline for produce food safety. Again, we'll be sending you this as a PDF, so you'll be able to look at this later. But you do have some time, depending on the size of your operation, to become compliant, to get into compliance, and you have even more time to figure out the water quality compliance, which is kind of a bear. But there's a lot of people doing studies on that and manure application right now. We're hoping for some better science-based information on that coming out soon. And if you're already food safety certified, you're most of the way there. The sticking point is still the water quality compliance. And again, with preventative controls, you have some time, particularly if you're a very small business. Even if you're a larger business, you still have 1 year to get into compliance. And here is a very handy-dandy tool that Luke Laborde and his colleagues at Penn State have created. So this is a pretty comprehensive flow chart that helps you to know whether or not you are exempt or whether you're covered. And NSAC, the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, has similar, has some great information and also some decision trees or flow charts to help you understand this. And again, all of this is in our resources that we're going to provide. Okay, so a customer requires GAP certification. Don't get too upset about this, don't panic. The first, and oftentimes people will say to me, a buyer just told me that I have to be food safety certified, or no, I have to have a GAP certification. And recently I was told this by a distributor. And that can be confusing because the distributor wasn't actually doing any farming, they were just distributing. So you need to get more information. Oftentimes the customer is as confused as you are, or even more so. So step one is get more information, ask questions. So is there a specific standard or audit scheme your customer requires? Do they have a preferred certification body? So are they okay with the USDA? Are they requiring it that it's a Primus GFS audit, in which case you have a slew of different people you could have do your audit for you? Do they require you to upload to one of these supply chain management platforms? So these are questions for your buyer. And then if your customer isn't specific, you get to choose. And you can find, I suggest that you talk to your peers about what their folks that you know who are already food safety audited and see what they're doing. That's a really good way to get started. And this is the nice thing about this is you can also decide how much you're going to spend because you can decide who you're going to pay to audit your operation. So next step is, pushing the wrong button here. Write a plan. And to do that, you may need to get training on the standard that you've chosen. If you have a facility, you may need to get HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, or HARP-C, which is Hazard Analysis for Risk-Based Controls, Risk-Based Preventative Controls, sorry. You may need to get training for that, and you may need to have the, what is it? Qualified personnel training, qualified person training. And it's easiest if you can find a template or borrow a peer's plan to get started. And there are templates out there on the web. I'm also in the process of getting all that stuff up on the Fair Food website because I have templates and for food safety plans and records and etc. That I've developed over the last couple of years that will be up there soon. The next step is to implement your plan. And this means you want to train your workers, you want to develop your standard operating procedures, you want to start keeping records and logs to document your practices, and you want to test your water sources. And there's a whole slew of things you need to do to implement your plan, but that is the next step. And then you want to schedule an audit. So the best thing to think about when you're scheduling an audit is when are you handling several crops at once, so that when the auditor comes, they see as many harvesting and post-harvest processes as possible, and that will save you money in the long run. And then finally, you want to talk to your food savvy peers, you want to visit farms and facilities with food safety programs in place. It really helps to see what everybody else is doing, and that's a great way to learn. Okay, so oftentimes people ask me how long does it take, and of course it depends. What does your customer require? What is the complexity of your operation, the scale of your operation, and what are the complexities of your customer requirements? What are your training needs, and what's the availability of training? Are you going to have to wait till the winter time to get training, which is often the case for farmers. It may not be the case for food hubs and distributors. How sophisticated are you and your staff in food safety? I have worked with people where we've done it in a year. I've worked with people where we've done it in 3 months, which was kind of scary, but we did it. I've worked with people where it's been better to take 2 or 3 years. So it really depends, and oftentimes it's been English as a second language that we've had to deal with too. So really, you have to think about that when you think about how long it's going to take you. How much internal capacity do you have to write plans, to train people? You've got to consider that. And then, do you have the money to have someone else come in and do the work with you or for you? So keep that in mind. And then what will it cost in time and money? So I always like to say the biggest challenge is to your brain and to your routine. It's more aggravating than difficult, and it often requires a shift in attitude. It's usually not as scary as people expect. I say usually, it generally isn't. Once you get into it and you start taking it step by step, it's not so bad. It's usually true, I'm thinking more about small farms here, that you won't need expensive improvements. Auditors are pretty understanding as long as you don't have anything really egregious, and you're obviously making steps on a continuous improvement journey. Most auditors are kind about that kind of thing. One thing I will say that one of the benefits is that this kind of analysis really leads to improved efficiency and higher quality. So you're taking a close look at your operation. Systemic change is really the easiest. So it's continuous improvement, not immediate perfection. And you're going to add new elements as you go. So if you have the the leisure to take more than 1 year or so to get this happening, you can add a few new elements each year and gradually develop a culture of food safety in your operation. It's really important that everyone is engaged. Everyone needs training. They need to work together as a team. And finally, you have to think about this. If the complexity or the customer requirements make it very costly and time intensive, this is a business decision. Is it worth the return on investment for you to get audited? I think it's always worth having the food safety training and the food safety plan and procedures in place, but it's going through the audit that you really have to decide on. So again, what will it cost? Someone has to do the work, and you can write the manual yourself, or you can pay someone else to do it, but you really can't outsource the management and the implementation. So managing and implementing the food safety program should be an internal role, and on smaller farms typically and smaller food hubs, the staff take on that role themselves. And some larger farms and some of the orchards that I've worked with, there's usually a staff member who takes on that role part-time. So the larger the operation, the more of the bigger that job is, basically. So in big operations, there's usually someone now who's full-time working on the food safety management. So the cost of the third-party audit will vary, and again, that comes down to size and complexity, and also how far the auditor has to travel. So an audit around here costs from $500 to $1,200-ish, depending on the auditor and depending on where you are. That's for a small to mid-sized operation in PA. And you should always ask about cost sharing. The USDA and many of the state departments of ag who do the auditing have cost sharing programs. And sometimes your buyer, I know that around here Wegmans has actually contributed to certification costs as well. So it's always worth asking. So just some final thoughts. We can't put one person in charge and walk away and expect an entire operation to be fail-safe. You have to engage the whole team, and really everybody, even the eaters, need to be educated about food safety. It's hard for those of us in the food safety production world to have all of that responsibility on our shoulders. Again, this is a critical business decision, so what are your business goals? Who do you want to sell to? And is it worth the risk to ignore food safety? So the audit is not the end game. You want a consistent implemented system. That's the goal. I think if any of you are familiar with the Jensen Farm cantaloupe debacle, this is proof of this, where they got a really high score in their food safety audit, and then their cantaloupes actually killed people. So it's not enough to just have a perfect looking operation when the auditor comes. This has to be something that's happening every day. And then finally, food safety is a journey. You learn as you go, you take it step by step, and you start as soon as possible. And it gets easier as it becomes familiar and part of the daily routine. So just a couple of things. As I said, I'm putting up stuff on the Fair Food website, the food safety webpage, so that's all coming soon, and we'll let you know about that. And then I am involved with the Northeast Sustainable Ag Working Group, and we have a conference in November. It's one of my favorite conferences. Because it really encourages discussion and collaboration across industry sectors. And there's a lot of peer-to-peer interaction. The conversations get very juicy at this conference. So I'm going to be involved with 3 food safety sessions around Group GAP and its alternatives, and a couple of other things. So that's there. These are the consulting services that I provide, and that is it.
Lindsay, thank you so much for that incredibly detailed and comprehensive presentation. That is so helpful. And just as a reminder, would you mind going back one slide? Please? One person's just putting that in. Great. Somebody just wrote in to say, please put your consulting services back up. Right. We went over that. That was quick. So this is wonderful to know that you've given so much information. The resources, as Lindsay's mentioned, have been compiled, and there are resources, a 2-page list of resources in the handouts. There's also a handout with that flow chart that was developed out of Penn State. Both of those are in the handouts and will be sent to people post-webinar. And we'll now have 10 or so minutes for questions. So just want to thank the people that have already put in some questions and encourage others to note your questions in the question box. And a reminder that we will send these out again after the webinar. So Lindsay, the first question came from Kim Bryden. If you are a CPG business or a cafe or restaurant, where do you fall under the FISMA law? Developing a preventative controls plan, need to register with FDA, other?
Okay, so if you have a business that sells food directly to the consumer, you're exempt under the Food Safety Modernization Act. So presumably there are other regulations you need to follow and health and inspection that is happening for you annually, but you're exempt under this FSMA rule regulations.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Another question came in from Joseph Tassone. Do FSMA requirements apply to all size farms who market to any consumer, distributor, or institution, or only to farmers who meet certain criteria?
Great question. So I had a lot of slides on that I took out of this presentation. So again, if you are a farm that sells direct to the consumer, and that includes selling to restaurants, selling to grocery stores, selling to institutions, as long as you're not selling through a third party, through a distributor or a processor, you're exempt from FSMA. If your income from your farm is less than $25,000 a year, you're exempt. And there are some other qualified exemptions. If you're selling between $25,000 and $500,000, I believe, you still need to make it possible for people to know where the food has come from. So if you're selling at a farmer's market, you need a sign up there saying where the food has come from and contact information for the farm. You know what? I'm just going to pull up some information about that. Do you want to go on to the next question, and then I can be a bit more comprehensive about that?
Great. Thank you so much. Next question. Where can people find more resources? On-farm examples and workshops, what are expected costs, and is there any way to get food plan help online or in person?
Okay, so in the resources that we've compiled, I try to include links to almost all of that. It's kind of hard to find out what things cost because every situation is different. And that's why I tried to say it depends on so many different things. The best thing to do is to talk to whoever you're auditing, your certifying body would be, to find out what certification would cost. Training cost depends on whether you're able to go to a co-op extension training in your area, and usually those are free or cheap. If you need to get the preventative controls training, the cost of that can be anywhere from $600 to $2,000. It depends on who's giving the training. And again, co-op extension tends to be the cheapest that I've seen. And the resources online for writing plans, familyfarm.org has a really great online tool to help you write a plan. Penn State and other co-op extension folks and some departments of ag have templates online that you can use, and again, I've got some of those in the resources. So it's definitely possible to do it yourself, but I still really encourage you to talk to peers and visit other operations that are already food safety, have already put in place food safety programs. I hope that answers. That was a pretty comprehensive question.
It was. Thank you so much. And as you said, that list of resources that you compiled is quite comprehensive, and so it's certainly a wonderful resource that like I said, is under handouts here and will be made available post webinar. Are you ready to get back to what you were looking up for Joseph's question, or should I go on with anyone? Okay, go ahead.
So let's see. Specifically for, well, I think first of all I should say that in the resources we've given you links to FDA guides. You don't have to go. Don't have to read through the entire 800 and whatever page rule. They have cheat sheets for you to look at. The Penn State flowchart and the NSAC flowcharts are really helpful to see, to guide you as to whether you're exempt or whether you're covered by the rules. Let's see. So just a few exemptions. The rule does not apply to farms where the average produce sold during the previous 3-year period is 25,000 or less. Produce that is used for personal or on-farm consumption. Produce that, this is very important, produce that's intended for processing, meaning that there's a kill step where the food is cooked or in some other way sterilized, I guess you could say. That is exempt, but you have to be able to prove that your product is going on to that kind of processing or you're doing it yourself. There are commodities that are really consumed raw, and there's a whole list of those. I think I put a link to that in the resources as well. It's kind of weird, some of them, but anyway, it's a little hard to understand why some things are considered really consumed raw and some aren't. But anyway, there is a list of those that you can check out, and if that's all you produce, then you're exempt. And you do need to have records proving you meet these criteria dating back to January of this year. They may just be financial records, or they may be whatever records you have to prove that your product goes through a kill step, whatever it may be. And then the qualified exemptions are for all food sales less than 500,000 over the past 3 years. So that means human and animal food, unfortunately, and it's not just produce, it's all food sales. This is one of the contentious things that's in the FSMA regs. And that also means sales to qualified end users. The qualified end users meaning direct to consumer, restaurant, institution, or retail. And boy, I could go on about this for ages. I think this is a whole other presentation. So I won't carry on. But we do have links in the resources.
Thank you so much. There is such a wealth of information out there that you've curated for us. So. Thank you.
And that's just a small sample of it. So.
Right. I know. Well, I know you said you wanted to keep it to 2 pages because otherwise it can get as unruly as the as what's coming out of USDA, perhaps, or FDA. Okay. One last question, I think, unless any more are coming in. Somebody wants to know more about cost sharing. Who do we ask, and can we encourage a business to cost share if they aren't already?
Yeah, so if you are going with a USDA audit, the USDA has, I think they're called cooperative agreements. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, this typically either the USDA or state departments of ag who are contracted by the USDA to do the certifying of farms, do the audits of farms, they have a pot of money that they can use to cost share with people who are being audited. So I have heard actually that some state departments of ag have run out of that money already, which is really sad to hear, but I think some of them still have it. So quite often this can be $300 to $400 towards your audit cost, which is really helpful. Now Wegmans in this region, in the Pennsylvania or the tri-state area, has over the years they've been really supportive of small farmers, and they have, I think, provided a $400 subsidy, I guess, to farmers who have been willing to become food safety audited. And there may be others. I don't know that Whole Foods is doing anything like that, but I guess one way to encourage a buyer to do this would be to collaborate with other farmers that they want to buy from or other food hubs that they want to buy from and say, this is a real hardship for us. Is there any way that you can help us with the cost, at least to get started? And there isn't a particular mechanism that I know of. I think it's just a matter of finding the people in those organizations that are supportive of regional food systems.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much also to the participants for all of your interest and your questions. We were not surprised, but pleased to see the great interest across the states, as mentioned. And Lindsay, you've just done an incredible job trying to lead us, or leading us through that thicket or swamp to a place of, at the very least, having a clearer global understanding with lots of resources and links to carry through for the specifics of the individual business and locale. So thank you so much for sharing your research and expertise.
Yana, can I just say one thing?
Yes, please. Please.
I am a very minor expert in this area, and I kind of ended up in it somewhat accidentally because it was what the farmers in my area needed the most. There may be people on this call who have information and resources that we are not familiar with, and we really encourage you to share those. Yeah, please feel free to send that along to Yana.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And if you get them to me this week, then we can include them in the email that's sent out, which will link to Google Drive with other resources and with the PDF of the PowerPoint and other materials. And if you don't get it to me this week, then please send it to me otherwise. The Chesapeake Foodshed Network is, of course, deeply interested and invested in food safety. And so we would be glad to share any resources that you have. We would also be glad to share any upcoming events that you might know of. And I know that Lindsay mentioned several in your presentation, but I'll also add to what Lindsay mentioned in terms of the NISA conference that's coming up in November and the 3 sessions that she mentioned there, that there's actually a webinar tomorrow put on by FDA sharing details on the final rule to update food facility registration, or food facilities rather. Registration is not required. That's an extra registration word there. But that is happening tomorrow, and the link is up. I'll leave it up there for a little while so people can copy it, or people could just Google FDA FISMA webinar August 3rd. Finally, we encourage you to please sign up for the CSN email list. You can do that by going to chesapeakefoodshed.net, and that's you'll get 4 to 5 emails per month with details about resources, food safety and other food system activities, events, and opportunities. Please also follow us on Twitter at @ChesFoodshed, and we'd love to see you on other social media as well, Facebook, LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you, to hear about your interests and your response. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out a post-webinar email, and that will include a link to a survey. We would be grateful if you would take a few minutes to fill that in. And finally, we want to thank you again for attending and let you know about some additional upcoming coffee talks and network learning opportunities. And so we're just about to roll out our fall coffee talk series. They tend to happen in the first week of the month. And you can see that they range here from social enterprises within food, the role of labor within sustainable agriculture, sharing from a farm to child care program, and then tools and strategies for the next generation of farmers to access land. We also have an event in September with June Hawley focusing on growing or weaving a network. And in late fall, details will be forthcoming about a Chesapeake Foodshed community viability and learning journey. We would love to hear from you about your ideas for a CSN Coffee Talk. Please contact us with your ideas or your feedback. We would love to hear from you. We would love to know what you are working on in the food system. And that's the last slide. Thank you so much for attending, for your interest, and we will follow up shortly with the follow-up materials. Thank you so much, And check out ChesapeakeFoodshed.net for more information and to register for upcoming events. We hope you can join us. Have a great day.
Okay.